Welcome to this week's virtual Sunday feast here at the home of Sri Sri Kishore Kishori. On behalf of Srila Prabhupada, a big welcome and thank you for joining. Today, we are going to have Narsima prayers led by Duti, who has been a student of Radhakund Mataji at the Vamsi Vaishnav School of Music for many years. And so she has kindly agreed to lead us in Narsima prayers. So thank you so much for doing this for us. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Hare Krishna. Namaste Narasimhaya Praladaladaine Hiranyakashi Purvakshaha Chilatam Kanakalaye Hitornasimha Paratornasimha Yato yato yamitato Narsimha Mahir Narsimha Vruda Narsimha Narasim Namatem Sharanam Prapadev Tavakara Kamalavadena Adbhuta Shringa Dalita Hiranyakashipu Tanubhenga Keshavadita Narahari Rupa Jai Jagadisha Hare Jaya Jagadisha Hare Jaya Jagadisha Hare Jaya Narsimhadev Jaya Narsimhadev Jaya Narsimhadev Jaya Narsimhadev Jaya Prahlad Maharaj Jaya Prahlad Maharaj Jaya Prahlad Maharaj Jaya Prahlad Maharaj Nitai Gaura Hari Bol Hari Bol Hari Bol Nitai Gaura Hari Bol Jaya Jaya Prabhupada 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you so much for that lovely rendition of Narsima prayers. And thank you, Radhakund Mataji, for, as always, organizing this. Next, we will turn it over to the keynote portion of the virtual Sunday feast, which is a continuation of the Brilliant as the Sun series. Today, we're going to be focusing on Srimad Bhagavatam, 3rd canto, 16th chapter. And tonight's talk will be given by me. So I guess I don't need to introduce myself then. And the title of it is called Lessons from the Perfect Leader. So when I was exploring this chapter of Srimad Bhagavatam, it's one that I've always found very fascinating. And I'll share a little bit of this now, a little more later, that I especially resonate with Jai and Vijay. And they are two of the main characters in this chapter. This really forms the second half of the story of how these doorkeepers in Vaikuntha, these doorkeepers to Lord Vishnu, incur the wrath of these four Kumaras, who are seemingly young. They're in youthful bodies that have a 5-year-old, but in fact are very, very elderly personalities. How they incur the wrath and curse of them. And there are a whole lot of other events that happen as a result of this interaction between Jai and Vijay and the four Kumaras. So this really forms the second half of that. And last week we had the stage set given by Ananda Vrindavan Mataji's discourse. So for those of you that didn't have a chance to join us last week, I'm just going to do a quick recap of the 15th chapter, because understanding the events of the 15th chapter is so integral in understanding the second half of the story and what we can extract from this pastime, just one angle of many different angles that we can understand this pastime from. So in these chapters, who is the primary narrator? The answer is Lord Brahma. And who is Lord Brahma speaking to? Lord Brahma is speaking to a whole host of demigods, universal local controllers of different functions within the universe. And they approached him because they noticed a big disturbance in the universal order. Namely, there was a darkness that was starting to cover the universe. It was getting in the way of the natural illumination from the sun and the moon. They were getting obscured. So in response to their queries, the demigods asking Lord Brahma, what's going on? Lord Brahma responded, telling them the story of how Jai and Vijay got cursed by the 4 Kumaras. And so the background of that story and how that curse relates to this darkening throughout the universe will become apparent as we progress. So the 4 Kumaras, they're actually the first sons of Lord Brahma. So when we say Lord Brahma is narrating this pastime, he's talking about things that his firstborn sons did. And they have the bodies of 5-year-old boys. They're traveling throughout the universe. They have the ability to travel both in this material world around us as well as the spiritual world. And so on such a sojourn, they passed out of the material world into the Vaikuntha realm, the spiritual worlds, where they approached the spiritual planet of Lord Vishnu. When they were on this special Vaikuntha planet, they passed through the first gate with no problems, the second gate with no problems, approaching Lord Vishnu in his palace. And like that, they safely passed through 6 gates. And it was only on the 7th gate where Jai and Vijay were posted. And as these 4 apparently young boys approached, Jai and Vijay immediately, they closed the gates. Or I shouldn't say they closed the gates, they blocked the progress of the 4 Kumaras and made it very clear, you cannot proceed any further, you're not welcome here. So there was that service that they were rendering for Lord Vishnu, but on the other side was the 4 Kumaras. They were so intensely eager to get the darshan, to be able to see Lord Vishnu personally. They'd only heard about Lord Vishnu from their father, Lord Brahma. They wanted to see Lord Vishnu for themselves, and they were so eager. They didn't see the beauty and splendor and how just amazing this Vaikuntha planet was. They didn't see that. They just saw, there's Lord Vishnu's palace. I want to make my way to see him. And so they were so close to attaining that goal. And at the last gate, these 2 people, Jai and Vijay, they closed the door effectively. And so perhaps understandably, the 4 Kumaras, they were incensed by this event. Have you ever had, and this is just a rhetorical question, just to consider what the situation facing the 4 Kumaras, have you ever had an experience where you've been so close to attaining a goal, something that maybe you've worked really hard for, you've studied really hard for, you've set the stage to meet that goal, only to have that unexpected last obstacle come at you in that final minute when everything seems so certain and suddenly it was taken away? Well, I know I can, and I think many of us can relate to that feeling at some point in our lives. Now, thinking about that experience, what's a natural reaction to that kind of an obstacle? Is it anger at the obstacle? Is it feelings of despair, introspection? Any of these and more. It can give rise to complex emotions, because when we have an idea of how something should be and then that doesn't turn out to be the reality, it's a difficult pill to swallow. And so this is what the 4 Kumars were experiencing, and this is how they managed it. So they felt anger and confusion. Their anger at being stopped, the progress toward their goal was blocked, and they didn't know why. And they were also confused. So in the 15th chapter, the four Kumaras raised the question, if nobody who is unqualified can enter the Vaikuntha planets, why are we being stopped? So they're saying the fact that they could get to the Vaikuntha planet itself, when most of us, at least I certainly can if I wanted to, we're not able to. There's a natural qualification in being able to be at that place, in that planet. So if we have that natural qualification to be here, why are we being stopped now when we're already qualified? And who are Jain Vijay guarding this place from? Because everybody here in Vaikuntha is on the same wavelength as Lord Vishnu. So what's this distinction? What's this discrimination? And then they speculated, maybe Jain Vijay, they're actually imposters of the residents of Vaikuntha. So maybe they're not even, they actually don't belong in here, which we could get in this whole philosophical argument about if they're saying everyone's of the same mind, but they're not, like, then that kind of brings up, are they guilty of the same duality that they're accusing Jain Vijay of being? So in their anger, they cursed Jain Vijay. Oh, you see this distinction between those that are fit to see Lord Vishnu and those that aren't. Go to the place where there is that kind of duality, the material world. And the interesting thing is, well, in addition to the four Kumaras in their post as, or their position as Brahmanas, the interesting thing about that is Jain Vijay didn't immediately try to defend themselves or get the Brahmana children to back down on their curse. They were just begging the four Kumaras, please don't let us forget Lord Vishnu, even when we have that fall down into the material world. So even in such a distressing situation, that's the quality of Jain Vijay. They are 100% aligned with the mood of Vaikuntha. They don't see anything but Lord Vishnu and his service. So there's a dilemma here. And the perfect leader, Lord Vishnu, came running out of the palace. As soon as he understood there was some disturbance, some misunderstandings, some curses being uttered to his doormen, devotees that he holds very, very dear, he came to assess the situation. And the interesting thing is also, it's not like the four Kumaras were just somebody causing trouble in the Vaikuntha realm. They're also devotees of Lord Vishnu, who are dear to Lord Vishnu, and who are afforded the same protections that Lord Vishnu affords to any of his devotees. And we can talk more about that as well. So what to do? So this is where chapter 16 begins, where Lord Vishnu has already arrived on the scene of a complicated situation. The Kumaras are feeling offended. A curse has been uttered, effectively taking two of Lord Vishnu's servants away from him, which is also kind of an interesting perspective, because you could make the argument that another way they could have looked at the situation is Jain Vijay are sincere servants of Lord Vishnu, so perhaps what they're doing is justified, but it was that intensity of longing to see Lord Vishnu that resulted in that curse being uttered. So the Kumaras are feeling offended. Jain Vijay are feeling fearful of losing their service to Lord Vishnu and forgetting him. And so the interesting thing is here, why did Jain Vijay deny entry to the four Kumaras? I'm not sure. Other than in the translation and purport, it's deemed that Lord Vishnu wanted it so. And so that's something that, as practicing spiritualists, when the configuration of matter just seems so inexplicable, and what we understand to be the principles and things don't necessarily go in that direction, and of course, under careful guidance, introspection, the Guru, Sadhu, Shastra, holding up to that lens, we can understand that Krishna's hand may be at work. But it's also important in how we conduct ourselves in those kinds of situations, where we can look at the example of the Kumaras and Jain Vijay, where as soon as we lose sight of other people as devotees, as soon as we forget this person is a devotee with sincere intentions, trying to serve their spiritual master, trying to serve Krishna, or we see other people not as devotees that don't yet realize they're devotees. So if we start to see from a discrimination perspective, there's devotees and then there's everybody else, or I become so familiar with devotees that I stop seeing them as devotees, that opens the door to offenses. Just as an example, one story that was shared when my spiritual master was receiving initiation, he shared this story several times, and Srila Prabhupada was initiating him. He was originally to be given the name Ramapada Das. And so Srila Prabhupada said, your name is Ramapada Das. And from the side, there was a senior godbrother assisting in the initiation ceremony and said, Srila Prabhupada, it's not Ramapada, it's Romapada. And Srila Prabhupada insisted, no, it's Ramapad. And the godbrother said, no, it's Romapad. Can't you read? Look at this piece of paper. And so Srila Prabhupada acquiesced, fine, your name is Romapad Das. And so at the time, Romapad Das, now Maharaj, at the time he was shocked at how his now godbrother was speaking to Srila Prabhupada. And sure enough, this elder godbrother soon fell down from his spiritual practice. And so that's a dramatic example, but there are many little ways in our lives. Let's think of interactions we have at home with our children. They're also aspiring spiritualists, our spouses, our friends, our relatives. How are we interacting with them? Are we seeing them as those parts and parcels of Krishna that either are actively trying to reawaken their relationship with Krishna or may eventually actively seek that relationship with Krishna? Or are we relating to them in a different way? Are we making those kinds of distinctions in our dealings? And not to say everybody needs to be interacted with in the same way, but always keeping that vision of here is a part and parcel of Krishna. And keeping that vision is one of the best protective measures we have against offending, especially devotees, let alone any part and parcel of Krishna. And so with this complicated scene, Lord Vishnu came, and there's a need for him to address the situation in a way that both of his devotees are satisfied. The four Kumaras are his devotees, and Jain Vijay are his devotees, and there's a conflict. And that's where we can start to look at some of the lessons from the perfect leader. And I'm going to take you through this chapter with just kind of that angle or lens of how Lord Vishnu manages the situation as the perfect leader, and specific texts to relate to this. So the first lesson that we can take from the perfect leader is perhaps one of the hardest. I was wrong. I made a mistake. How can I make this better? Acknowledging mistakes and then actively rectifying them. So in that chapter, I'll just read a couple of the translations around this line of how Lord Vishnu speaks to the four Kumaras. The personality of Godhead said, "These attendants of mine, Jai and Vijay by name, have committed a great offense against you because of ignoring me." So another way of saying that is, what they've said or done in denying your entry is not representative of my desire. And then Lord Vishnu goes on to say, "Oh, great sages, I approve of the punishment that you who are devoted to me have meted out to them. To me, the Brahmana," so referring to the four Kumaras, is the highest and most beloved personality. The disrespect shown by my attendants has actually been displayed by me because the doormen are my servitors. I take this to be an offense by myself, therefore I seek your forgiveness for the incident that has arisen. So an interesting perspective. He's not distancing himself from the behavior of the servants. He is saying that this behavior is not indicative of my feelings towards you, so please don't make that incorrect conclusion. And then he goes on to say, a wrong act committed by a servant leads people in general to blame his master, just as a spot of white leprosy on any part of the body pollutes all of the skin. Anyone in the entire world, even down to the Chandala, dog eater, who lives by cooking and eating the flesh of the dog, is immediately purified if he takes bath in hearing through the ear the glorification of my name, fame, etc. Now you have realized me without doubt. Therefore, I will not hesitate to lop off my own arm if its conduct is found hostile to you. Wow. So this is Lord Vishnu's approach to acknowledging a mistake and taking aims to at least pacify the four Kumaras and rectify the situation, opening the door to some kind of dialogue to reconcile the situation. Now, to go back a little bit, it's kind of interesting. So the four Kumaras, they had this eager desire to see Lord Vishnu. They were denied entry at the final gate before being able to enter Lord Vishnu's palace. And because of the ensuing situation, Lord Vishnu came out. So through that situation, the four Kumaras had achieved their goal. They got to see Lord Vishnu. And so in that way, Lord Vishnu reciprocated with their desire to have his audience. Now, just thinking about that situation, so Lord Vishnu's reciprocation, how he's speaking to the four Kumaras, being a very apologetic and supportive of their course of action, and at the same time standing by Jai and Vijay. He doesn't say, oh, yeah, these people have no business here in Vaikuntha, they should get out. He supports the Brahmana's punishment of them, but that doesn't mean that he has rejected Jai and Vijay. And that's an important distinction that we'll explore a little bit more later. Now, Lord Vishnu showed this example, and Krishna at the office, the Supreme Controller, he admits mistakes. So for us, why is it so hard to admit a mistake? It's a super important lesson that to learn in life, in leadership position, in any situation, to be comfortable with admitting when I either directly mess up or something I'm responsible for doesn't go according to plan. And part of the reason it didn't go according to plan was due to some shortcoming I brought to the situation. Why is it so hard to admit a mistake and then try to rectify it? There's a certain amount of vulnerability in not being correct, that my false ego, so my false sense of identity, means I have to prove myself to always be the best, the brightest, the rightest. And related to that, not being correct may be a weakness. It may be seen as a weakness. In actuality, it's a huge strength. But anytime there's anything less than perfection or success, there's the fear that it may be seen as weakness, and somebody else who maybe is a little bit more capable or a little bit better at hiding shortcomings or failures or mistakes might just take my position. So it can be scary. So to empathize with that, it can be scary to admit mistakes. But it's one of those things that the more you do it and the more comfortable you are with it, of course, learning from it is important, the easier it becomes. And then, you know what? Some amazing things happen when we can be comfortable with our mistakes and acknowledging them, admitting them even before a group. What does it do? Acknowledging a mistake builds trust. So when something is going on, if, let's say, a leader at work or even Lord Vishnu especially, admitting that something didn't go exactly according to plan or how it was supposed to, how they were supposed to represent him, admitting that builds trust. So when Lord Vishnu especially says, this is like this, or I did this for this reason, or whatever it might be, there's a good reason for it. I mean, of course, Lord Vishnu can't make mistakes. He's the supreme controller. But get the idea there that there's a lot of trust that goes on, that we can have faith in the integrity of the person who is either leading us or that we are leading. It also establishes a cultural norm that it's okay to make mistakes. If I'm comfortable with owning my mistakes and showing that the world doesn't end, then perhaps in team situations or whatever it might be, mistakes can be dealt with when they're small rather than when they blow up and become a crisis. It also earns the respect of the team or the group. There's an element of courage, mostly to overcome my own personal feelings to admit a mistake. And so there's a certain level of respect that comes with seeing, oh, here's a person who is secure in who they are. And they have no problems admitting when things go well and when things don't go well. And personally speaking, that's the kind of person that I aspire for. The cool thing also about admitting mistakes and then rectifying them is it allows people to rally behind the leader to work together to make the best out of the situation. And there's this example that was coming to mind. Some of you may be familiar with this company called Gravity Payments. And they made headlines 5-6 years ago, I think it was, because they were one of the first companies to offer a $70,000 a year minimum wage salary, like from the entry level position, minimum 70,000 salary. And that got a lot of media attention, but where the story really gets interesting is what happened when COVID struck. So for those of you not familiar, Gravity Payments does, I think it's like credit card processing for small businesses. And as those of you who may be following the news with the COVID crisis, small businesses got slammed. So Gravity Payments revenue went down like 50%, I think it was. And so they were going to have some pretty significant deficits early on in the COVID crisis. So there was an all-company call, and the CEO was talking about how there would be a need to lay off employees. And then some of the employees said, well, it doesn't have to be that way. We could all just step in and take 50% pay cuts. 98% of the staff, and it was like 120 or 150 employees, 98% of them offered pay cuts, which is astounding. And I think it was about 10 of them said, we'll work for free. We just want to see this company keep going. So that's what happened when there was a leader in charge who was willing to admit mistakes, problems, challenges, because this idea of an across-the-board salary cut and allowing people to figure out a way collectively how to solve this challenge, that wasn't even on his radar going into that call. But what they did is they ended up adopting that plan, and they were able to get people up to full salary in a very short amount of time because there was that committed group. Now, seeing that as a good example of when their leadership, when we look to the example of Lord Vishnu, or even in these other kind of worldly examples, there can be so much good, so much validation, so much feelings of support, so much benefit to acknowledging mistakes, and then either individually or collectively working to rectify them, just being honest with the situation. Now, another thing that is illustrated in this chapter by Lord Vishnu is the quality of empathy. Empathy meaning being able to understand the feelings of others. So it's not enough to admit mistakes were made and work out a plan. There also needs to be that emotional connection with the aggrieved. And empathizing with the aggrieved party, it allows for better decisions to be made that not only address, let's say, the specific circumstances, but also address the emotional or underlying need that gave rise to that conflict in the first place. And we'll explore a little bit about how Lord Vishnu does that with the four Kumaras and Jai and Vijay. But the other thing is it makes the different parties feel heard and respected, which are incredibly important things, especially if you want to take a mistake or a conflict and nip it in the bud before it becomes a crisis. Because in many conflicts that I've seen, the actual challenge or area of dispute is this much. And it's how it's handled afterward that has the power to address it or blow up the problem into this much. And so I'll just read a couple of texts from that chapter. This is text 10 and 11. So this is Lord Vishnu speaking about his view of the Brahmanas, where he says, the Brahmanas, the cows, and the defenseless creatures are my own body. Those whose faculty of judgment has been impaired by their own sin look upon these as distinct from me. So those impaired by their own sin see cows, defenseless creatures, and Brahmanas as separate from Lord Vishnu's own body. And then goes on to say, they, the people impaired by sin, are just like furious serpents, and they are angrily torn apart by the bills of the vulture like messengers of Yamaraj, the superintendent of sinful persons. On the other hand, they captivate my heart, who are gladdened in heart, and who, their lotus faces enlightened by nectarian smiles, respect the Brahmanas, even though the Brahmanas utter harsh words. They look upon the Brahmanas as my own self, and pacify them by praising them in loving words, even as a son would appease an angry father, or as I am pacifying you. So Lord Vishnu is affirming the exalted position of the Brahminical order. In his glorification of the Brahminical order to the four Kumaras, he is affirming how precious, how special a place the four Kumaras have in Lord Vishnu's heart. So he's empathizing first that I understand this terrible mistake was made, but know that you are very dear to me. And affirming their feelings, their conceptions of what a Brahminical order can expect. So affirming that need, that when it wasn't met, resulted in them uttering that curse. And that's the really amazing thing. So when we're talking about empathy, as exemplified by Lord Vishnu, he meant everything he was saying. It wasn't just some words to get the four Kumaras to calm down and feel a certain way. He honestly meant it. And the amazing thing is empathy can be so disarming because many times the grievance is not about a set of situations. It's about an emotional connotation to that set of situations. And the four Kumaras respond so nicely to what Lord Vishnu is presenting. And they say, "O Lord, you are the protector of the highest of the twice-born. If you do not protect them by offering worship and mild words, then certainly the auspicious path of worship will be rejected by people in general who act on the strength and authority of your lordship. Dear Lord, you never want the auspicious path to be destroyed, for you are the reservoir of all goodness. Just to benefit people in general, you destroy the evil element by your mighty potency. You are the proprietor of the three creations and the maintainer of the entire universe. Therefore, your potency is not reduced by your submissive behavior. Rather, by submission, you exhibit your transcendental pastimes." So another way of saying, the four Kumars are saying, we understand this incident in no way diminishes our conception of you, Lord Vishnu, and your just humility and quality of empathy, by your submissive mood toward us, you're exhibiting your transcendental pastimes. It's making us love you even more. So they feel acknowledged. And the amazing thing is with empathy, acknowledgement, relationships grow. So from a seemingly difficult situation, an element of discord, with open dialogue, with empathy, relationships get enhanced. Now, another lesson that we can take away from this is upholding the responsibilities that come with leadership means sometimes temporarily letting go of something, or especially in this case, someone that you love dearly. So Jai and Vijay are eternal servants of Lord Vishnu. He counts them as his eternal entourage. When I was preparing for this, my friend and I were talking about this, and he jokingly referred to Jai and Vijay as Lord Vishnu's transcendental bouncers. And by the four Kumaras cursing Jai and Vijay, they were effectively taking Lord Vishnu's eternal associates, seemingly, away from him. Their curse was taking Jai and Vijay away from their eternal service, away from their association with Lord Vishnu, and they were condemned to enter the material world. And this kind of situation, so Lord Vishnu has empowered the Brahminical order to perform many duties within society, and one of them was the curse. So the Brahmanas, whom Lord Vishnu holds so dear, have that capability as a way of correcting wrongs in the world around them. And so as devotees of Lord Vishnu, the four Kumaras, and as Jai and Vijay are also devotees, Lord Vishnu had to uphold the empowerment of the Brahminical order, this curse, and at the same time reciprocate with the four Kumaras. In that case, he presented himself, they had his darshan, and also protect his other eternal devotees and associates, Jai and Vijay. But by upholding the curse, he needed to, at least temporarily, say goodbye to Jai and Vijay from their service as his gatekeepers. And we've seen this also in scripture. So Lord Ram, in the Ramayana, for those of you that have read it or heard it or are studying it, there are a couple of very prominent examples where, for the sake of upholding the responsibilities that come with leadership, difficult choices need to be made, regardless of how much personal pain it may result in. The first example I can think of in the Ramayana was Lord Ram's father, Dasarath, banishing Lord Ram into the forest and accompanying him with Sita and Lakshman for 14 years, due to a promise that he made to his third wife, that he would grant her two special benedictions, two boons. And Lord Ram was the very life of Dasarath. So to say goodbye to Lord Ram, to say goodbye to his presence for 14 years, what to speak of even a day, was so much more than what Dasarath could bear. And he very quickly left his body after Lord Ram started his period of exile. This also happened again toward the end of the Ramayana, where Lord Ram sent Sita Devi away to live in the forest in Valmiki's ashram because of some accusations that Lord Ram was something like a henpecked husband for accepting Sita Devi back home when she had been kidnapped, after she had been kidnapped and in Ravana, the main antagonist's palace, for such a long time. And so Sita Devi and Lord Ram, their eternal consorts, enact, on this planet to enact certain pastimes, and to say, Lord Ram, you need to uphold the responsibility of your position, the rules and regulations that govern human society, and in order to preserve that, you'll need to send Sita Devi into exile. Unthinkably painful. But sometimes that's what comes with leadership, and that's what Lord Vishnu is showing us. And let's think about the opposite. What happens if we don't uphold higher principles, even if it may hurt? Being able to uphold principles, to stick with principles, is one of the things that separates the human form of life from the animal form of life. In the animal form of life, we're governed by just fulfilling basic needs: eating, sleeping, mating, defending. But when we're introduced to higher concepts, like Krishna consciousness, which comes with some principles, or being expected to lead people, in the case of Lord Vishnu or Lord Ram or Dasharath, being able to lead people in a manner that is conducive for their Krishna consciousness, sometimes means very painful decisions that in a very microscopic way may not seem right, have to be made, have to be stood by. Like what's right is not always the most popular thing. But if these principles, these higher principles aren't held, what happens? So if there's nepotism that happens, the exceptions, the breaking the rules, the bending of the rules, however it may be, it empowers those lower tendencies, especially amongst segments that may not have the full picture or context. The things that float around ISKCON today, Srila Prabhupada said this, and Srila Prabhupada said this. And one of the things that's really amazing to always hear is how much the statements that Srila Prabhupada makes are within a certain context. But if we just take certain statements, like I forget where I read this, but it was circulating on social media, I think, or something like that, where somebody just pieced together statements of Srila Prabhupada from many, many different sources, and then just combine them. And it looks like Srila Prabhupada is saying, let's eat meat, which is definitely not anything that he would ever advocate or condone. But the idea is that when we empower those lower tendencies by not upholding higher principles, this is what you start to get. Cobbling together of different thoughts, different statements for my convenience, rather than the sake of upholding the higher principle. And we can also look even like here in the US with the previous president and just the empowerment of hate politics and white supremacy and a whole bunch of other things that may not have, let's just say, revealed the best side of humanity. So going back then to the concepts around lessons in leadership, there's also something that Lord Vishnu shows very strongly in this story, that he supports everyone in his care. As mentioned before, he doesn't disown Jai and Vijay, even though they didn't properly represent him. And he makes this very clear to the four Kumaras. And his situation can be especially tricky because of the principles in where Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita 29 through 31, I envy no one, nor am I partial to anyone. I am equal to all. But whoever renders service unto me in devotion is a friend, is in me, and I am also a friend to him. Now keep in mind, when he's saying this, we have to think this applies to the four Kumaras and to Jai and Vijay. So even if one commits the most abominable action, if he is engaged in devotional service, he is to be considered saintly because he is properly situated in his determination. Apologies, 1 second. Okay. All right. Okay. I'll come later. Okay? So even if one commits the most abominable action, if he is engaged in devotional service, he is considered saintly because he is properly situated in his determination. He quickly becomes righteous and attains lasting peace, O son of Kunti. Declare it boldly that my devotee never perishes. 1 second. Devotees in conflict, you got it right. Live streamed. So he quickly becomes righteous and attains lasting peace. So son of Kunti, declare it boldly that my devotee never perishes. Now it's interesting that the four Kumaras cursed the doorkeepers in a way where his devotees apparently perished. And Lord Vishnu's statements to the four Kumaras, where he says in that chapter of the Bhagavatam, these servants of mine have transgressed against you, not knowing the mind of their master. I shall therefore deem it a favor done to me if you order that, although reaping the fruit of their transgression, they may return to my presence soon, and the time of their exile from my abode may expire before long. So he's saying, okay, I'll uphold your curse, I'll support that, because I completely understand where you're coming from on this, but just don't make it too long. They're dear to me. They're part of my eternal entourage. I want them here. So the punishment is understandable and just, but they are my servants. So if you so wish, please let them return soon to my service. And so Lord Vishnu then afterwards said to his attendants, Jai and Vijay, depart this place, but fear not. All glory is unto you. That's a pretty positive statement, just considering they've been cursed to get exiled from Vaikuntha. And then Lord Vishnu continues, though I am capable of nullifying the Brahmana's curse, I would not do so. On the contrary, it has my approval. So Lord Vishnu, again, he's supporting the empowerment of the Brahminical order. This departure from Vaikuntha was foretold by Lakshmi, the goddess of fortune. She was very angry because when she left my abode and then returned, you stopped her at the gate while I was sleeping. So there was a pastime where she came back. Jai and Vijay stopped her because Lord Vishnu gave them strict orders. I'm going to take some rest right now. Don't let anybody disturb me. And so Jai and Vijay were there, and Lakshmi Devi came, and they told her, I'm sorry, Lord Vishnu's sleeping. You can't come in right now. And so she was pretty upset, but she waited. That was amazing. She waited. And then when Lord Vishnu arose from his rest, Lakshmi Devi was allowed in. She reported their behavior to Lord Vishnu and said, they don't know what it means to be a servant. They barred me entry when I'm always at your lotus feet. And so she had cursed them as well. So part of this, when he later on says that this was his arrangement, part of understanding this is that that was part of the reason for the arrangement why Jai and Vijay. And so the Lord assured the two Vaikuntha inhabitants, Jai and Vijay, that by practicing the mystic yoga system in anger, you will be cleansed of the sin of disobeying the Brahmanas, and within a very short time return to me. So the four Kumars cursed them to go to the material world. Lord Vishnu said, you're going to come back soon, and you will practice the mystic yoga system in anger. So that's how powerful this meditation process is. So when we chant Hare Krishna, and in that sound, Krishna is personally there, we're trying to cultivate a favorable relationship with him. None of our teachers or mentors are encouraging us to develop the yoga system in anger, which in itself, I think, would be quite a feat. Rather, we're trying to cultivate a favorable relationship with Krishna. And just understand how powerful any kind of remembrance of the Lord is when he is advising Jai and Vijay, in anger, you will be cleansed of the sin of disobeying the Brahmanas, and within a very short time, return to me. How powerful is remembrance of the Lord? And the really beautiful thing about how Lord Vishnu supports those in his care, and that's the final lesson in leadership, from the perfect leader, supporting those in your care. In addition to reassuring Jai and Vijay that just practice this yoga in anger, you won't forget me, you'll come back soon, what does Lord Vishnu do? How does he reciprocate with Jai and Vijay's close service? Lord Vishnu, Krishna, personally comes into the material world to help Jai and Vijay return. He appears personally to deliver his servants, and he never allows them in their different births to forget him, though their remembrance is anger. And just as for our Krishna comes as Varahadev, where Hiranyaksha, one of the two brothers, is killed. He comes as Lord Nrsimhadev, where Hiranyakashipu is killed. Lord Ramachandra and Lord Krishna. And it's at their time of meeting Lord Krishna and their departures due to Lord Krishna is when they're restored to their posts as Jai and Vijay in the spiritual world. Now, the amazing thing is the duration of time between Lord Varahadev and Lord Krishna is quite a while. I didn't do the calculation. I'm sure somebody out there has. Definitely in the millions of years. And just thinking about millions and millions and millions and millions of years, and Lord Vishnu's earlier assurance that you will return within a very short time. It's kind of interesting. But if we look at it in a relative sense, if we understand that we as conditioned souls have been in this material world since time immemorial, well, I guess the fact that you can count the number of years between Lord Varaha and Lord Krishna means that it was relatively short. And so that's the beauty of that relationship, being in that loving relationship with Krishna, that he always finds these perfect ways to reciprocate with devotees and never let the words of his devotees fail. Even when Lord Brahma gave the benediction to Hiranyakashipu that he couldn't be killed in the day or the night by any animal or man, by any weapon, not in the sky, not on the ground, and all these other conditions, that even that Krishna upheld the word and supported the devotees in his care. So he always upholds the word of the devotee. And so to bring this to a close, so Lord Brahma is narrating this whole story of the four Kumaras in Jai and Vijay, and how Jai and Vijay were cursed, how they were cursed to fall down into this material world. And the chapter ends with Lord Brahma taking us back to that assembly of him speaking with the demigods when he says, "My dear sons," the demigods, "the Lord is the controller of the three modes of nature and is responsible for the creation, preservation, and dissolution of the universe. His wonderful creative power, Yoga Maya, cannot be easily understood even by the masters of yoga. That most ancient person, the personality of Godhead, will alone come to our rescue." So Krishna will never forget his devotee. "What purpose can we serve on his behalf by deliberating on the subject?" So a few things in this. We'll start with something interesting that Srila Prabhupada writes in the purport of that last verse in this chapter. He writes, "One who continues to serve the Lord even in reverse conditions is assured that he will go back to Godhead, back to the Vaikuntha planets. Lord Brahma assured the demigods that there was no use in talking about how disturbing the situation of darkness, how the disturbing situation of darkness was taking place. I'll say that again. There was no use in talking about how the disturbing situation of darkness was taking place, since the actual fact was that it was ordered by the Supreme Lord. Brahma knew this because he was a great devotee. It was possible for him to understand the plan of the Lord." So Lord Brahma, in other words, is saying, this is Krishna's desire. So what is the value in us trying to understand how it happened? Rather, let's just meditate on how we can be instruments to be a part of that plan. Like in Bhagavad Gita, when Krishna encouraged Arjuna or challenged Arjuna that you can, the outcome of this battle of Kurukshetra is already ordained, and you can either be a part of it or you don't need to be. It's up to you, but the outcome is the same. So better to act as a servant to Krishna and to his plan and be a part of it rather than be on the other side. The other thing about this is that, I should say another way that this principle is illustrated is the question of if one contracts malaria. The important thing is understanding what to do about the situation of malaria, taking proper medication, making sure you stay hydrated, making sure you get proper rest, recovering. The concern is not which mosquito bit me, where did it happen, was it this mosquito bite or this mosquito bite or this mosquito bite or whatever. That's not important at that point. And so Lord Brahma's encouraging the other demigods, there is this universal disturbance, but know for certain that the Lord will come to protect us from this universal disturbance. So I've shared with you the story of how this came to be, that these two servants of Lord Vishnu, Jai and Vijay, they fell down from their spiritual positions and they appeared in the womb of Diti. And when they were born, they were Hiranyakashipu and Hiranyaksha. So all of this universal disturbance is because these two individuals, Jai and Vijay, in the material world, as Hiranyakashipu and Hiranyaksha, are so powerful that just their presence in Diti's womb has diminished the universal power of the demigods. That's how powerful these are. Now, going back to the idea of Lord Vishnu's transcendental bouncers, which I'm being a little light when I say that, but let's think of the quality of a bouncer. You need to be pretty powerful, right, to take on that job, so that you can make sure that the right people will just say, get in, and the right people stay out. And when individuals with that eternal service go into a material context, they become powerful, supercharged super demons in the material world as part of the curse. There's a lot of power. And what's being illustrated in that story is they were so powerful that it was disturbing the universal order. A resulting darkness was creeping over the entire universe. And so ultimately, Lord Brahma encourages dependence on Krishna, which is honestly the best lesson that we can take away from this, that especially when these situations are so bewildering, so hopeless, that there's really nothing left but to depend on Krishna. And so I'll stop there, and I would like to open the floor if there are any comments or questions. Let's see, there's some comments in YouTube. All glories to you devotees of Lord Shri Krishna Chaitanya Haribol. True laughter is good therapy. LOL. Yeah. Let's see. Let's see. Let's see. Please don't get any. Brahma, you know as God, you don't say it's a demigod. You know the sun does not change its position. They are mighty mega God, the source. But forget that and think only of Lord Hari, Hari, Hari. I'm not sure I followed that question on YouTube, but yes, Lord Brahma he's the primary creator and empowered demigod who was given the ingredients by Krishna to construct this material universe, this particular universe, and there are many Lord Brahmas that construct many universes, and different souls occupy that post of Lord Brahma. But yes, he is one of the principal demigods, and a very empowered demigod, as well as a very empowered and special devotee of Krishna. All right. All right, I'm not seeing anything else in the chat, so there's no shame in ending a few minutes early. I'll just recap with at least the main leadership lessons that I was seeing in this chapter.
Hi, Krishna Prabhuji, I had a quick question.
Hi, Krishna.
Hi, Krishna Prabhuji, Dandavat Pranam. I had a quick question. All glories to Shri Prabhuji. When I was listening to the first part of your lecture today, first of all, I'd like to say it was very, very nice. Thank you so much for enlightening us. And my question is, when you mentioned that they were at the 7 gates, it reminded me of how, like, in our body, we have 9 gates. Have you heard of any symbolism connected to this, the 7 gates?
I haven't. So yeah, no, I haven't heard anything related to that. And just on that theme of what you're bringing up about symbolism in general, one thing that I've just observed and heard related to spiritual concepts and personalities in these texts is there is the literal history, like there literally are 7 gates. But the amazing thing is that in all of these creations, in all these beings, there's nothing that's arbitrarily done. So there are many ways to see the same thing. For example, Hiranyakashipu's name means soft bed in gold, loosely translated. Now it's kind of interesting that the name was so befitting of a personality like Hiranyakashipu. But along those lines, it's a literal history, as well as there might be some specific reasons behind that, which I'm not aware of though. If that was getting at what you were saying about the 7 gates versus the 9 gates in this body.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Okay, Hare Krishna. All right, so I'll just recap with the lessons that in this chapter, based on the example of Lord Vishnu, we can understand the importance of acknowledging mistakes and rectifying them. We can see the value of empathy. We can understand that in positions of responsibility with leadership, sometimes we need to make decisions that may personally hurt, but are for the sake of a higher principle. And it's also making those in our care feel loved and supported, never forgotten. So I'll leave you on that. Thank you so much, everybody. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. And I'm very happy to announce that next week we'll be continuing our Brilliant as the Sun series with the 17th chapter, and it will be given by their graces Rama Raghava Prabhu and Amara Mataji. So a very exciting